ever. It's one of the strangest stories in the Bible. And let's be honest, it makes Jesus look bad. It seems petty, it seems unfair, it just feels wrong. Jesus is walking along, he's hungry, he sees a fig tree, and he goes to it hoping for a snack. But the tree has no figs on it, so he curses it. He literally says, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And the next day, his disciples see the same tree, and it's withered from the roots up. Dead. What is that? It feels like a tantrum. It feels like a powerful being using his power for a completely trivial, angry reason. Why would the Son of God, the one who taught us to love our enemies and turn the other cheek, kill a tree for not having fruit? Especially, as the Bible itself points out, because it wasn't even the right season for figs. It's completely fair to read that and be confused. It's fair to be bothered by it. For a lot of people, this story is a real stumbling block. It doesn't fit with the picture of Jesus we see everywhere else. He heals the sick, he feeds the hungry, he forgives sinners, and then he zaps a tree for being a tree. If that's all the story was, then yes, it would be a problem. It would be a story about an angry, irrational Jesus. But it's not just a story about a man in a tree. Almost nothing in the Gospels is that simple. There's always something happening under the surface. This isn't a random act of frustration. It's a deliberate, symbolic act. It's an acted-out parable. Jesus is doing something to show his disciples and us something incredibly important. To get it, we have to zoom out. We have to look at the context. Where was he? What had just happened? And what did a fig tree mean to the people who first heard this story? It's because, for them, a fig tree wasn't just a tree. It was a symbol loaded with centuries of meaning. Once you understand the symbol, the whole story changes. The unfairness starts to fade, and a powerful, and frankly, disturbing message takes its place. This isn't a story about a hungry man, it's a story about God's judgment on a religion that had lost its way. First, let's look at the story itself, as it's told in the books of Mark and Matthew. They tell it slightly differently, and those differences are important. Mark's version is the more detailed one. It happens right at the beginning of the last week of Jesus' life, what we call Holy Week. Jesus has just made his big entrance into Jerusalem. People were shouting Hosanna and throwing palms on the road. It was a moment of high drama and expectation. The very next day, Jesus and his disciples are walking from Bethany, where they were staying, back into Jerusalem. Mark says Jesus was hungry. He sees a fig tree in the distance that has leaves, so he goes to it hoping to find some fruit. When he gets there, he finds nothing but leaves. And then Mark adds the crucial detail, for it was not the season for figs. Then Jesus says to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." His disciples heard him say it. Then they go into Jerusalem. And what does Jesus do? He goes straight to the temple. And he cleanses it. He drives out the people who are buying and selling. He flips over the tables of the money changers. He's furious. He says they've turned his father's house into a den of robbers. It's a scene of chaos and confrontation with the religious authorities. After all that, they leave the city. The next morning, they are walking the same road again. Peter sees the fig tree and points it out. "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." And then Jesus uses this moment to teach them about faith. He tells them if they have faith in God, they can tell a mountain to throw itself into the sea and it will. Mark sets this up like a sandwich. The cursing of the fig tree is the first piece of bread. The cleansing of the temple is the filling. The discovery of the withered tree is the second piece of bread. In literature, this is a device to show that the two outer events are meant to explain the inner one. The story of the fig tree is the key to understanding the story of the temple cleansing. They are the same story, told in two different ways, one with a plant, one with a building. Matthew's version is a little more compact. He puts the temple cleansing first. So Jesus comes into Jerusalem, clears the temple, and then leaves the city. It's the next morning that the fig tree incident happens. In Matthew's account, Jesus sees the tree, finds no fruit, and curses it. And unlike in Mark's story where it withers overnight, in Matthew's, it withers immediately. The disciples are amazed and ask how he did it. And just like in Mark, Jesus uses it as a lesson about the power of faith. The core elements are the same. A tree with leaves but no fruit, a curse, a withered result. A lesson on faith. But the placement next to the temple cleansing is the giant clue we need to follow. This isn't about botany, it's about theology. So, let's tackle the biggest symbol here, the fig tree. For you and me, a fig tree is just a plant that grows figs, but for a first-century Jew, it was so much more. In the Old Testament, the fig tree was a common symbol for the nation of Israel. It represented their spiritual health, their prosperity, their relationship with God. When things were good between God and Israel, the prophets described a time when everyone would sit under their own vine and their own fig tree. It was an image of peace, security, and blessing. But when Israel turned away from God, the prophets used the image of a barren or destroyed fig tree to describe God's judgment. Listen to what the prophet Jeremiah said, speaking God's words to a disobedient Israel. I will surely consume them, says the Lord. No grapes shall be on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree, and the leaf shall fade. Or the prophet Hosea, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first fruits on the fig tree in its first season. He's talking about the good old days, but then he describes their fall into idolatry, and God's judgment is pictured as a loss of that fruit. Micah, another prophet, laments the spiritual state of the nation by saying, there is no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig which my soul desires. He's saying the nation is spiritually barren. This imagery was baked into their culture. When Jesus walked up to a fig tree, especially right before a major confrontation at the temple in Jerusalem, his disciples would have had all this symbolism in the back of their minds. He wasn't just walking up to a random tree, he was walking up to a symbol of Israel. And what did he find? The tree had leaves. This is a really important detail. Those leaves are a sign of life. From a distance, this tree looked healthy, it looked promising. It was putting on a good show. It had all the outward signs of being a vibrant, productive tree. But when Jesus got up close and looked for what really mattered, the fruit, there was nothing. It was all show and no substance. Now think about what Jesus was confronting in Jerusalem. He was confronting the religious system of his day, centered in the temple. From the outside, it looked impressive. The temple was a magnificent building, a hub of activity. There were priests in their robes, elaborate rituals, daily sacrifices, prayers, and festivals. It had all the leaves of religion. It looked alive and healthy. It looked like it was doing exactly what it was supposed to be doing, connecting people to God. But Jesus saw something different. He saw that the heart of it was corrupt. The system had become a barrier between people and God, not a bridge. It was focused on outward appearance, on following the letter of the law while ignoring its spirit. The leaders were more concerned with their own power, prestige, and wealth than with justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And Jesus called the Pharisees' whitewashed tombs beautiful on the outside but full of death on the inside. That's a perfect description of a tree with leaves but no fruit. So when Jesus curses the fig tree, he's not having a fit of anger over a missed meal. He is performing a prophetic sign. He's making a living, breathing statement about the spiritual state of the nation, particularly its religious leadership. He is saying, this system looks alive, but it is spiritually barren. It makes promises of life that it cannot keep. And because of that, it is under judgment. The curse on the tree is a symbolic declaration of the coming judgment on the temple and the religious system it represented. Within a generation, in 70 AD, the Romans would destroy that temple and it would never be rebuilt. The tree had withered. This is a powerful interpretation, but it still leaves us with that nagging, unfair detail from Mark's Gospel. It was not the season for figs. This makes it sound like Jesus was being completely unreasonable. You can't blame a tree for following the seasons. How can you condemn it for not having something it wasn't supposed to have in the first place? This seems to be the nail in the coffin for the unfairness argument. But here, a little knowledge of botany in the Middle East helps a lot. Fig trees in that region have a peculiar growth cycle. The main crop of figs appears in the late summer. So, at the time of Passover in the spring, it was indeed not the season for figs. However, something else happens with many fig trees. A small crop of tiny, edible green knobs, sometimes called taksh or breba figs, often appears in the spring before the main leaves come out, or at the same time. These weren't the main sweet figs, but they were edible and were a sign that the tree would produce a full crop later in the year. The key point is this: if a fig tree had already leafed out, as this one had, it should have had some of these early edible buds on it. A fig tree that produces leaves without producing these early figs first was a sign that it was a barren tree. It would not produce any fruit that year at all. So the leaves were a promise. The leaves were an advertisement. They shouted to anyone passing by, I am a healthy, fruitful tree. I have life. But it was a false promise. It was a lie. The tree had the appearance of fruitfulness, but none of the reality. It was a hypocrite. Now, the story looks very different. Jesus, being hungry, was not being unreasonable. He saw the leaves and rightly expected to find at least some small, early fruit. When he found none, he knew the tree was a fraud. Its appearance did not match its reality. And that made it the perfect symbol for the temple. The temple, with all its religious activity, the leaves, was making a promise to the world. It was advertising itself as the place to find God, to find spiritual nourishment, to find life. But Jesus looked closer and found it was spiritually barren. The money changers in the temple were exploiting the poor. The religious leaders were more concerned with rules than with people. The system was focused on outward show, not inward transformation. It was a tree with leaves but no fruit. It was a fraud. So Jesus' action is not a fit of PK. It's a judicial sentence. He isn't punishing a tree for being a tree. He is demonstrating what happens to anything or anyone that professes to have a relationship with God, but produces no evidence of it in their life. The judgment isn't because it had no fruit. The judgment is because it had leaves. It was the hypocrisy that was condemned. It pretended to be something it was not. This makes the connection to the temple cleansing even tighter. When Jesus walks into the temple and turns over the tables, he's not just angry about commerce in the courtyard. He's judging the entire system for its fruitlessness. He quotes the prophet Jeremiah saying, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." A house of prayer is a place that should be producing the fruit of connection with God for everyone. A den of robbers is a place that takes from people, that exploits and deceives. It was all leaves, no fruit. The withered tree on the following day is a terrifying and stark picture of the result of this judgment. It's not a slow decay, it's a sudden withering from the roots. It's a statement that the entire system was now obsolete and cut off from its source of life. The old covenant, based on the temple and its sacrifices, was coming to an end. Jesus was about to establish a new covenant through his own death and resurrection. But the story doesn't end there. Jesus doesn't just leave his disciples with this scary image of a dead tree. He turns it into a lesson. When Peter points out the withered tree, Jesus doesn't say, "See? That's what will happen to the temple." He says, "Have faith in God." This seems like a strange turn in the conversation. What does faith have to do with the cursed tree? Everything. The religious system represented by the barren fig tree was a system based on works, on ritual, on geography. Your connection to God depended on going to the right place, the temple, saying the right words, and performing the right sacrifices, all mediated by the right people, the priests. It was a system that, in practice, produced very little genuine spiritual fruit of love, joy, peace, and justice. It produced leaves of religiosity. Jesus is now replacing that system. The dead tree represents the end of that way of doing things. The new way is not based on a building or a ritual. It's based on faith, a direct personal trust in God. He tells them that through this faith, they will be able to do things that seem impossible, like moving a mountain. He's not talking about literal mountain moving as a party trick. He's using hyperbole to make a point. The mountain they were facing was the mountain of the corrupt and powerful religious establishment in Jerusalem. It seemed immovable. But Jesus is saying that through faith, God was going to remove that entire system and replace it with something new, a community of faith-filled people, the church. So, the progression is this one. The tree with leaves, but no fruit, represents a hypocritical, works-based religion that is spiritually dead. A new covenant where a real living relationship with God produces genuine fruit in a person's life. This story, then, isn't primarily a warning to ancient Israel. It's a warning to everyone for all time. It's a warning to us. It asks a very uncomfortable question. Am I a person with leaves, but no fruit? It's easy to put on the leaves of religion. You can go to church every week. You can read your Bible. You can say the right prayers. You can talk a good game. You can have all the outward appearances of being a good spiritual person. Those are the leaves. And they can look very impressive from a distance. But Jesus isn't interested in leaves. He's looking for fruit. What is fruit? In the Bible, fruit is the tangible outcome of a changed heart. It's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It's caring for the poor. It's seeking justice for the oppressed. It's forgiving those who have wronged you. It's humility. It's a life that is actually different because of what you believe. The story of the fig tree is a sober reminder that religious activity is not the same as spiritual life. A profession of faith is not the same as a life of faith. It's possible to look very much alive, very religious, and yet be spiritually barren. And that, in Jesus' eyes, is a terrifying state to be in. The judgment isn't on the person who is struggling, who knows they are weak and fruitless, but is honestly trying. The judgment is on the one who proudly displays their leaves, pretending to have it all together, while their heart is far from God and their life produces nothing of substance. It's a judgment on hypocrisy. So why did Jesus curse the fig tree? He did it to create an unforgettable living picture of a deep spiritual truth. He did it to show his disciples and us what God thinks of a religion that is all show and no substance. He did it to announce that the old barren system was over and a new fruitful way of living by faith was beginning. It wasn't an act of random anger. It was a carefully planned prophetic demonstration. It wasn't unfair to the tree, because the tree, by its very nature having leaves but no pre-fruit, was a perfect natural symbol of deception. And ultimately, the story isn't even about the tree. The tree is just a prop in a much larger drama. The story is about us. It forces us to look past our own leaves and ask the hard question, is there any fruit?